In today's episode of BizJet TV, we're going to be talking about an accident that happened to an Embraer Phenom 100 flying into Paris de Bourget. It was coming from Venice in Italy. This happened in February 2021, and the accident report's just come out. And looking at the accident report, there's some interesting things that we can learn from this. Now, fortunately, in this accident, the airplane stalled on landing, and the landing gear collapsed. The two pilots and the passenger managed to get out the airplane with just a few scratches and minor injuries. There was a fire upon impact, but the fire brigade very quick into action there, managed to put the fire out right away, which is why the three people walked away alive, which is really, really important. Now, why did this happen? Now, the weather conditions weren't too good. It was icing conditions, and that the pilots had briefed each other. They started their descent. They were putting the anti-icing systems on and off. And from the accident report, it actually says here, the captain explained that he had experience operating in icing conditions and specified that he used a wing stab de-ice system only when he visually observed the presence of ice on the leading edges of the wings and deactivated it once this ice had broken up. He added that the landing performance limitations imposed by the use of the de-ice system meant it was not possible to land at certain airports asserted by the operator. So to avoid having to divert, the crew did not leave this system continuously activated, contrary to the procedure. So this is the first mistake they made. The other thing is, when you're working out on this particular aircraft for ice, you're working out the speeds for landing. If you're going to keep the icing systems on for landing, you need to come in at a faster speed. If you're coming in at a faster speed, you're going to need more runway. And in this case, the runway wasn't going to be long enough. And this is what a lot of Embraer 100 operators have been doing, is they've been switching these icing systems off, keeping the lower speed for landing so they can make it into shorter runways. But, you know, ice does accumulate, and this is what happened. Ice was still accumulating on the wings, on the tail, and they came in at a slower speed. The airplane stalled because of the ice changed the shape of the wing, and they slammed the airplane onto the runway. Landing gear collapsed, and the airplane was basically a write-off. So, what can we learn from this? This is a lesson, an ice lesson again. Ice can kill. You have to also not cut corners. Apparently, on a forum of Embraer pilots, a lot of people were saying that this was an unofficial procedure that a lot of people were using. Coming in at those lower speeds, switching those de-icing systems off because they're looking around and say, well, I don't see any ice, but, you know, you can't see the tail of the airplane from the cockpit. So, you know, you should keep these systems on at all times. And, you know, and if that means you can't land at the airport, you're going to have to divert. You're going to have to divert. And this is one of the problems in private aviation. It's because people are paying so much money. And as I said, you know, they're paying 15 times more money to fly private than to fly business class. But, you know, it's 10 times more risk. I mean, it's not that because you're paying, 15 times more money that this airplane is going to be able to do things that other airplanes can't do. Oh, no, because I paid more for the airplane, this airplane does not accumulate ice because I paid more for it. No, ice affects all airplanes. And this is something that is really, really needs to be understood. You know, you're not to push yourself with these things. The pilots need to know what they're doing, and the pilots shouldn't be pushed to cut corners. And, you know, if you're going to be flying in icing conditions, make sure you do a course in winter operations, understand icing conditions, understand how ice affects the particular airplane you're flying, look at all the various accidents that have happened relating to the aircraft that you're flying to do with ice, and find out what the pilots did wrong, so that you know exactly how to behave, what systems to use and how to use them, how to calculate the speeds, performance and all that when the icing conditions are present. This is really, really important. So these are kind of the lessons we learned from this one. A bit like, you know, the lesson we learned from the other accident, which was a Phenom 300 that crashed in Provo, Utah. And what I'm seeing is there is a bit of a trend here of icing happening on the Phenom 100 and 300 and causing accidents. And now, don't get me wrong, it's not the aeroplane the problem, okay? Every aeroplane has its so-called snags. And as a pilot, you need to know your aeroplane, and you need to understand what problems the airplane can encounter and know what procedures to follow. And, you know, if they'd followed the proper procedures in the checklist and in the training that they'd received, they would not have got themselves into this situation. So that's really, really important. Checklists are there for a reason. And just to give you a bit of an insight there, when an airplane's going through flight testing, they test the airplane inside and outside the envelope. They have to design the flight envelope. Now, of course, the engineers come up with what they think is the flight envelope, and then test pilot's job is to push those boundaries. And the airplane gets flown in and out all sorts of weather conditions, icing conditions, very hot conditions, high altitude conditions, and the airplane has to go through a number of flight tests in these conditions, and the parameters get recorded, and then the flight envelope gets created, the procedures get created, the checklists get created, the emergency checklist or quick reference handbook gets written up with all the different, okay, this emergency happens, this is what you need to do, and all the instructions, all the performance numbers. So all that gets produced as a result of certification, which is why an airplane has to go through flight testing so that it can produce all this data. Now, of course, it has happened in the past that when an airplane is first certified and starts flying, there are snags which maybe suddenly crop up, and I certainly had some snags happen on the Dornier 328 jet when I first operated it, because I was one of the first pilots in the world to operate that airplane. And we reported back on a weekly basis to Dornier, which made the airplane, and they made some modifications in the checklist, and we made some recommendations and suggestions and that, but it was nothing major, it was nothing dangerous, it's just a few things. But today, because that happened 25 years ago, today, because of computer and technology and AI and that, once airplanes are certified, there are very, very few errors that creep in to the design and the procedures and everything and that. So, but as a pilot, you need to follow the checklist. You can't sort of invent things and say, oh well, it's looking like we've got no ice on the wings, we're going to be okay. But if the checklist tells you to keep the icing systems on, if it tells you that with the icing systems on, you have to calculate a higher speed to be safe, and if the higher speed means we can't make that runway because it's not long enough, we have to divert. You have to tell Mr. Passenger, sorry, because of weather conditions, we have to divert. And that's just the way to go. And this is the problem with private aviation. People are paying more money, and they're thinking in their heads that because they pay more money, that suddenly the pilots and the airplane morph into a spaceship from Alpha Centauri, and it can defy the laws of physics and Mother Nature. No, that's not the case. But anyway, that's enough from me here on the analysis of this accident. So let's get the conversation going here in the comments below, and if you haven't subscribed to BizJet TV, subscribe and join to gain access to the exclusive content here on BizJet TV, and check this other video out about the Phenom 300 crash that happened in Provo, Utah just recently. And that's all from Fabrizio Poli on BizJet TV, and I'll see you on the next one.